A husband left his wife during her cancer treatment and returned years later to claim her inheritance. What he found in her house left him speechless. The sea breeze gently blew, filling the air with the unmistakable scent of salt and wildflowers that permeated every corner of the small coastal town. The houses, with their red-tiled roofs and warm-colored facades, lined narrow streets that wound towards the harbor. In this corner of the world, where time seemed to stand still, stood Sophia's house, a haven of creativity and life. The walls were adorned with canvases that captured the light of the sea, and brushes rested on tables covered in color stains, witnesses to the passion Sophia poured into each piece of art. Sophia, in her 40s, had a free spirit that radiated an unmistakable warmth. Her eyes, always alert and full of emotion, reflected the sensitivity she poured into her art. As long as she could remember, she had felt a special connection to painting, as if every brushstroke was a conversation with the world and herself. Her daughter, Eleanor, inherited that same desire for expression, though she channeled it through music. At 16, with her wavy brown hair and curious eyes, Elena was a promising talent, searching for her own voice. Life in Sophia's house flowed with laughter, music, and colors. Elena would practice on the living room piano while Sophia painted in her studio, and the harmony between mother and daughter created a welcoming atmosphere. However, in the moments of silence, there was a subtle emptiness that could be felt. That emptiness had a name: Leonardo. Leonardo, Sophia's husband, was a successful and ambitious businessman. Tall with a piercing gaze, he was often a standout at town meetings due to his stature and financial prowess. But behind his charisma, there was an insatiable thirst for recognition. The family knew that work was his priority. Sophia accepted it, though with a silent pain she avoided even acknowledging to herself. In recent days, that distance had become more evident, and the home they once shared began to reflect that separation. Leonardo would arrive home late, his perfectly pressed suits carrying the scent of tobacco and long meetings. On weekends, when laughter filled the house and sunlight bathed the living room, his chair remained empty, only occupied by the shadow of broken promises. Sophia, by habit, would still set his plate on the table, but her heart would shrink a little each time he didn't appear. Eleanor noticed, though she said nothing, and when the emotions grew too intense, she sought refuge in the school's music room, where her fingers turned pain into melody. The contrast between Leonardo's outward life and family life was palpable. While he was seen in the town as a pillar of success and stability, at home his figure blurred. Neighbors who passed by Sophia's house greeted her with admiration. They saw in her an artist who embodied the essence of the place. Her paintings, displayed in the local gallery, were known not only for capturing the beauty of the sea and mountains, but also for conveying emotions so deep they moved those who gazed upon them. However, few knew that behind that ever-present smile, there was a woman carrying the loneliness of a broken marriage. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the white curtains of Sophia's studio, she took a new canvas and began to paint. Her hand moved almost automatically, as if her soul, not her mind, were guiding the brush. The colors blended into deep blues and somber grays, unintentionally reflecting the restlessness she felt. In that moment, a slight pain in her chest made her stop. She froze, the brush still in the air, and a shadow of concern crossed her face before she set it aside and sat down, breathing heavily. Eleanor, passing by the studio, saw her and approached with worry. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked, her voice still innocent, but tinged with unease she couldn't hide. Sophia, forcing a smile, nodded. "Just tired, darling," she replied, though something in her gaze hinted that she knew it wasn't just that. Elena, not wanting to press further, kissed her on the forehead and returned to her music, seeking solace in the keys that seemed to offer the comfort her mother seemed to need. As night fell and the town sunk into the whisper of the sea and the distant flickering lights of the boats, Leonardo came home. His greeting was brief, and his presence, though physical, felt more absent than ever. Sophia watched him for a moment, wishing to break the invisible barrier that separated them, but he passed by toward his office, his mind already preoccupied with other matters. Sophia lowered her gaze, feeling that something in the air had changed permanently, like the prelude to a storm no one could avoid. That night, as the waves softly crashed against the rocks and the wind whispered through the palm trees, the calm that had held the family together shattered into a silence that foretold an uncertain future. The mornings in the coastal town were generally a refuge of peace, with the sound of waves gently breaking and seagulls soaring over the harbor in search of their breakfast. Sophia usually took advantage of these early hours to paint, allowing the dawn light to filter through the windows of her studio, illuminating the wet brushstrokes of her latest creations. But lately, her routine had been interrupted. The constant fatigue and a sharp pain in her chest were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. "It's just tiredness, she repeated to herself as she tried to restore her energy with a cup of tea. But the pain wouldn't relent, and her reflection in the mirror showed a face paler and more fatigued than she remembered. Finally, on a day when the exhaustion became unbearable, Maria, her best friend, convinced her it was time to seek answers. Maria, always with her messy, curly hair and a knowing smile, looked at her with a mixture of concern and tenderness. "Come on, Sophia. It's just a checkup. Do it for you and for Eleanor," she said, gently squeezing her hand. The visit to the doctor felt like a hazy dream. The white walls of the consultation room and the antiseptic smell felt cold, distant from her world of colors and textures. Andrei, the doctor, and an old college friend, entered with a kind yet concerned expression. His eyes, which had always reflected confidence, now carried a shadow Sophia couldn't ignore. After a series of tests and analyses, the diagnosis hit like an unexpected blow: an aggressive cancer. The words echoed in her mind like an endless reverberation, and the air seemed to vanish from the room. "What does this mean?" Sophia asked, her voice breaking, looking to Andrei for hope, for a way out. He, though moved, maintained the professionalism that had always defined him. He explained the kind of treatment that would be needed, the steps to follow, and the prognosis. But his voice felt distant, as if speaking from another place. Maria, sitting beside Sophia, gripped her hand tighter, her eyes filled with contained tears, but a determined expression to be there for her. The drive back home was in silence. Sophia gazed out the car window, watching as familiar streets passed by, seeming as if they belonged to another world, one she suddenly felt distant from. Upon arriving, she found Elena practicing on the piano, her melody light and cheerful, unaware of the storm that had just unleashed inside her mother. Sophia smiled, though her eyes reflected a pain Elena couldn't yet see. The news to Leonardo was met with coldness. That night, when Sophia, still trembling, sat before him in the living room, she realized the distance between them was much greater than she had imagined. Leonardo, in his perfectly pressed suit with his phone in hand, listened to her words without looking up from the screen. "Cancer," Sophia whispered. The word filled the room like a poisoned dart. Leonardo raised his eyes, but his gaze didn't show the mix of fear and empathy Sophia sought. Instead, it softened for a moment, only to harden again almost immediately. "This is complicated. We'll see how it's handled," was all he said, before returning to the emails and documents waiting for him. Sophia, who had expected tears, a hug, or at least a word of comfort, felt something inside her shut down. The sound of Elena's piano keys reached her ears, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a world where none of this was happening. In the following days, Leonardo's reaction became more apparent. His nights at the office stretched into the early hours, and the house felt emptier and emptier without him. Maria showed up every day, bringing food, jokes, and poetry books she read aloud, while Sophia tried to digest the news. "You're not alone, Sophia. "You'll never be alone," Maria repeated like a mantra, and Sophia, though exhausted, found temporary solace in those words. Andres, on the other hand, wasn't just her doctor. He spent time explaining the details of the treatment, suggesting changes in her diet, and reminding her with a kind smile that science and the human will could work together. His presence was an unexpected balm, an anchor amidst the storm. However, as the house filled with murmurs of support and visits that brought renewed energy, Leonardo became a shadow who, though physically absent, weighed heavily in every corner of the house. One night, as the sea roared louder than usual and the moon reflected in the windows, Sophia sat by Elena's piano. The girl had left her scattered sheet music on the keys, and Sophia looked at it with tenderness. Her fingers, trembling and tired, played a soft note, and the sound filled the empty house. She looked around, and for the first time since the news, allowed the tears she had been holding back to fall. Each sob was a recognition of her fear, her pain, but also a reminder that, despite everything, she was still here. She was still fighting. And so, in the heart of the night, Sophia understood that although the road ahead would be long and solitary in many ways, it would also be filled with those who loved her and would support her unconditionally. Days passed, and the news of Sophia's diagnosis became a constant presence, like a shadow that never disappeared. Hospital visits and treatment sessions started to become part of her routine, and although the house was still filled with colors and music, there was something in the atmosphere that had grown tense and fragile. Sophia, though exhausted, tried to remain strong for Elena, who was beginning to notice the increasingly prolonged absences of her father. Leonardo, wrapped in an armor of apparent work stress, spent more time at the office and less at home. At first, Sophia tried to justify his behavior, convinced that his fear of the illness had made him emotionally withdraw. However, the long nights spent alone and the weekends when Leonardo didn't show up led her to question the true reason for his absence. Calls to Leonardo's mobile often went to voicemail, and the evasive answers he gave when he finally returned didn't ease her suspicions. One night, as the living room clock struck midnight, Leonardo came home. His suit was immaculate, and his perfume, expensive and new, a scent Sophia didn't recognize, flooded the room as he crossed the threshold. Sophia, sitting on the sofa with a book she hadn't read, looked up and watched him in silence. There was a coldness in his gaze that made her shiver. "Another long night?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Leonardo avoided her eyes and nodded, murmuring something about a meeting that had run later than expected. However, deep down, Sophia knew that the distance between them was no longer just emotional. The name Isabel had begun to appear in Leonardo's conversations, initially in a casual manner. "A new investor," he would say, "very promising, with innovative ideas." But the frequency with which he mentioned her, and the way his tone changed when talking about her, raised an alarm in Sophia. Her suspicions were confirmed in the form of whispers at Leonardo's office, conversations that reached the ears of mutual friends, and that, with sorrow, Maria finally shared with her. The relationship between Leonardo and Isabel had stopped being strictly professional and had become something more intimate. Sophia, with a broken heart, but still with a will that had not completely vanished, decided to confront the situation. One afternoon, when the sun reflected off the paintings in her studio, Leonardo entered and stopped upon seeing her sitting in front of a blank canvas. She looked up, letting the silence fill the room before speaking. "Do you want to tell me what's really going on, Leonardo?" she asked, her voice steady. He looked at her, lips pressed tight, eyes avoiding hers. After a tense pause, he sighed heavily. "I need to find clarity," he finally said, the words cutting through the air like knives. "The pressure, all of this, I can't handle it. I feel suffocated." His eyes met hers at last, but instead of the warmth Sophia had once known, she only found discomfort and a slight trace of guilt. "I'm going to take some time away. I don't want to drag you and Elena into an emotional breakdown. It would be worse if I stay." Sophia looked at him, trying to understand how the man who had vowed to stand by her in sickness and in health now chose to leave. She wanted to scream, demand answers, but she couldn't. She just nodded, her eyes misty, but without a single tear falling. Leonardo gathered some of his things and, without another word, closed the door behind him, leaving the echo of betrayal in his wake. The first day without him was a whirlwind of emotions. The house, once full of life, felt like an empty shell. Eleanor, who had heard the whispers and felt the tension, quickly understood what had happened. She looked at her mother with reddened eyes, searching for answers, but Sophia could only hold her, offering the only comfort she could give. "We're together, my love," she whispered, and for a moment they both allowed themselves to cry, sharing a pain that even Eleanor's music couldn't transform. Maria arrived the next day, as she always did, but this time with a more determined look than ever. "You're not alone, Sophia," she said as she entered, enveloping her in an embrace that seemed to want to piece together the broken parts of her friend. "And you never will be." Andres, although their relationship had been purely professional up until that point, also began to spend more time nearby. His visits, which had initially been for talking about treatment and her health, turned into moments of emotional support. He brought notebooks, brushes, and paints, suggesting warmly that perhaps it was time to return to what she did best: create. During those days, Leonardo's absence felt like a ghost haunting the house, a reminder of broken promises and faded dreams. But as Sophia fought to overcome the betrayal and the pain, she realized that within her, there was still something stronger: the will to move forward for Eleanor, for herself, and for the love that still existed in her life, even if it no longer came from the person she once thought would never abandon her. The weeks turned into a succession of days where routine felt more like a battle than a habit. Sophia's treatments were grueling. Chemotherapy drained her energy, made her feel fragile, and left her in a constant state of exhaustion. But despite the fatigue and pain, there was a spark that refused to extinguish. That spark was kept alive by Maria, who arrived each afternoon with energy that defied any adversity, and by Andres, who never let Sophia face the medical and emotional difficulties alone. Elena, for her part, dealt with her own grief. Her father's absence and her mother's suffering hit her with an intensity she rarely admitted. Her refuge was in the school's music room, where the piano keys became the only way to express what she couldn't say aloud. Lucas, the pianist with dark hair and deep eyes, became her confidant. They shared afternoons where the notes were sad at first, heavy with the sorrow that bound them, but slowly transforming into compositions filled with hope. As if together, they found the courage the world denied them. At home, Sophia looked at the blank canvases that surrounded her, each one a promise unfulfilled. Andres's words, who visited often, echoed in her mind. "Painting has always been your strength, Sophia. Allow yourself to return to it, even if only a little," he had said one afternoon, as he handed her a notebook and a set of paints. At first, the idea of painting felt distant, as though it were a life she had left behind. But one night, when the house was shrouded in complete silence and the shadows of the past tried to envelop her, she gathered her courage. Sophia sat in her studio and picked up a brush for the first time in weeks. Her hands trembled, and the first strokes she made were unstable, unsure. But she didn't stop. She let the emotions she had suppressed for days spill onto the canvas, allowing the dry tears that refused to fall to be translated into colors and textures. She painted for hours, each stroke a catharsis, each color a cry of pain or a whisper of hope. At dawn, she stopped to observe what she had created, an abstract landscape where shadows and light intertwined, reflecting her inner struggle. Eleanor, upon waking and passing by the studio, saw her mother sitting in front of the painting. There was a spark in Sophia's eyes that Eleanor hadn't seen in a long time. Without saying a word, Eleanor entered and sat beside her. Sophia, sensing her daughter's presence, took her hand and looked at her with a weak but genuine smile. In that moment, both of them understood that, even though life had struck them hard, there was still space for beauty and resilience. Andrei's visits became more than just medical checkups. He brought coffee, shared anecdotes from their university days, and unknowingly filled the house with a warmth that Sophia had forgotten existed. One afternoon, after reviewing the latest test results, Andrei looked at Sophia and noticed the painting that now hung in the corner of the studio. His eyes shone with admiration. "This is incredible, Sophia. This is a reflection of who you are. Strong, able to create even amidst the storm." Maria, on her part, organized small gatherings with the neighborhood friends, bringing stories, laughter, and childhood recipes. The house, though still marked by Leonardo's abandonment, was beginning to feel alive again, filled with voices and small joys. Even on days when Sophia could barely get out of bed, she knew there were people willing to lift her spirit. Elena continued her practices with Lucas, who became a beacon during those dark days. They played pieces that spoke of pain, hope, and overcoming struggles, and in those moments, Elena felt that her music not only healed her, but also served as a bridge to her mother, a way to tell her that she was still there, fighting alongside her. Weeks turned into months, and although the treatments remained harsh and Sophia's health fluctuated, something had changed. The house, once dark and full of bitter memories, now had new paintings on the walls, new melodies in the air, and the occasional laughter of Maria and Andres filling the empty spaces. Sophia realized that, though abandoned, she was not alone. Her life, although marked by betrayal and illness, could still be filled with moments of joy and love. Sophia's resilience was not only reflected in her physical recovery, but also in her spirit. With every painting she completed and every conversation she shared, she felt that she was reborn, bit by bit. And though the ghost of Leonardo still haunted her thoughts, he was no longer a presence that defined her, but rather a reminder of how far she had come on her own, and with those who truly loved her. Far from the bustle of Sophia's house, Leonardo lived in a very different reality in his luxurious penthouse, a modern space rising above the city with panoramic views. At first, his new life with Isabel, the sharp-eyed young investor with a calculated smile, had seemed like the peak of personal and professional success. The nights were filled with lavish dinners, exclusive meetings, and ambitious projects. Isabel, with her charisma and strategic skills, seemed like the perfect partner, someone who shared his thirst for power and success. However, behind the perfect facade, cracks began to appear. Leonardo, accustomed to being the central figure in every conversation, began to notice small details. Important meetings he was no longer invited to, decisions Isabel made without consulting him, and partners who, once loyal, now seemed distant. The trust he had placed in Isabel turned into uncertainty, but his pride prevented him from admitting that he might be losing control. The first signs of trouble in his businesses came in the form of rumors, unexpected failures in investments, and a market that no longer responded to his maneuvers as it once had. While Leonardo tried to maintain his facade of success, Isabel was weaving her plan. Cunning and cold, she began to edge him out of key decisions, making sure every important document bore her signature and that every financial move solidified her position in the company. Leonardo, consumed by his struggle to prove he was still the visionary man everyone knew, didn't see the pieces moving against him. One night, after considerable losses in an investment he had fiercely defended, Leonardo found himself alone in his office, gazing out at the city that had once been his domain. The reflection of the lights in the windows returned the image of a defeated man, though he still refused to accept it. Isabel, who entered at that moment with a dossier under her arm, smiled with the same coldness that had captivated him at first. "Things don't always go as expected, Leonardo. It's important to know when to let go of control," she said, placing the documents on the table with a firm gesture. It was a sentence disguised as advice, and Leonardo knew it instantly. Isabel's ambition was no secret, but Leonardo had underestimated her determination. What had started as a collaboration quickly transformed into a covert battle for power. Isabel's moves accelerated. Private meetings with key partners, contracts that excluded him, and the consolidation of her name in important transactions. Leonardo, caught in a spiral of denial, attributed his problems to the market, to the competition, to anything but the betrayal brewing in his own offices. The days grew longer, and the nights lonelier. Isabel's presence became omnipresent and threatening, and each encounter with her was a display of power. Stress, pressure, and the feeling of constant loss began to visibly wear on Leonardo. The lines in his face deepened, and the spark in his eyes dimmed. The fall he had long feared was no longer just a rumor. It was a reality, knocking at the door insistently. Meanwhile, in the few hours of solitude he had, the image of Sophia returned to his mind. The news of her exhibition and the growing recognition her works were receiving struck him with a mixture of jealousy and regret. The irony of the woman he had abandoned at her most vulnerable, now rising as a symbol of strength, did not escape him. The house they had once shared, filled with paintings that captured her essence, had become the center of a story of overcoming, while he, who had taken the easy way out, fell deeper into the abyss. The final blow came in the form of a confidential report he accidentally found in Isabel's office. His hands trembled as he read the details. Isabel had been pulling the strings to displace him and take control of the companies, and now she was in a position to strip him of everything he had built. The signatures and contracts he had signed without reviewing, trusting Isabel's quick and smiling explanations, were now his sentence. Reality shattered when Isabel, realizing that Leonardo had discovered her moves, made no attempt to hide them. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. "Leonardo, it's time to understand that power isn't lent, it's taken," she said, with a coldness that made the room feel even emptier. In that instant, the facade of control that Leonardo had maintained broke. His businesses were on the brink of ruin, and the prestige he had protected for so long was now nothing more than a distant memory. The loneliness, which had been his choice when he left Sophia and Elena, was now his sentence. The passage of time brought a mix of challenges and small victories for Sophia. The treatments continued to leave her exhausted, and the illness remained a persistent enemy. But there was something in her that was beginning to bloom again: her art. The paintings that at first had been just an exercise to channel her pain transformed into works of such intensity that they seemed to speak for themselves. Each painting narrated a fragment of her story, her struggle, and her hope, and soon these works captured the attention of the local art community. The exhibition at the City Gallery was the first step toward that resurgence. Maria, always with her unwavering energy, took charge of organizing the event, mobilizing friends and acquaintances to support Sophia. On the night of the opening, the gallery was filled with neighbors, artists, and art critics who had heard about the strength that Sophia had captured in her canvases. The centerpiece of the exhibition, the abandonment, stood out in the middle of the room, drawing everyone with its rawness and depth. The female figure, standing in the middle of a storm with her face lifted to the sky, was a clear reflection of Sophia, battered by life, but indomitable. Sophia, dressed in a simple blue dress, a nod to the sea that had always inspired her, felt overwhelmed by the attention. The compliments and admiring comments from the guests filled her with pride and, at the same time, shy disbelief. She couldn't help but glance at Maria and Andres, who were watching her from a corner with satisfied smiles. Andres, who had been by her side every step of the way, felt that in that moment, the strength and spirit he had always admired in Sophia had finally found a voice that everyone could hear. Elena, who attended the exhibition with Lucas by her side, felt that her mother was coming back to life in a way she hadn't thought possible. The two young people exchanged knowing glances, and Lucas gently squeezed Elena's hand, understanding that the night meant a lot to both of them. Amid the bustle, the notes from Lucas's piano began to resonate, leading into an impromptu performance that captured the attention of those present. The music, soft and melancholic, blended with the essence of the paintings, creating an intimate and moving atmosphere. Art critics began to speak of Sophia as a new voice in the artistic scene, one that not only conveyed beauty, but also a story of struggle and rebirth. Invitations to participate in more exhibitions and projects began to arrive, and Sophia, though overwhelmed, felt that her passion was finally becoming a path that transcended her pain. Andrei, for his part, could not hide the admiration he felt. The visits to Sophia's house, which had initially been purely professional, turned into long conversations about life, dreams, and shared memories from their youth. The connection between them grew stronger, and although Andrei kept his feelings silent, his eyes spoke for him every time he looked at Sophia. Sophia's house, which for so long had been a place of sadness and absence, was now filling with life again. The paintings hanging on the walls were witnesses to her journey, and the laughter of Maria, the presence of Andrei and Elena, were a constant reminder that unconditional support could heal more than any treatment. Elena, seeing her mother stronger and more determined, found in her a source of inspiration and began preparing her own presentation for a charity gala at school, one that would reflect their family's story of pain and hope. On quiet nights, when the house would sink into silence and the smell of the sea filtered through the windows, Sophia allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply and feel the weight of everything she had overcome. She knew the battle against the illness was not over and that the emotional scars were still there, but she also understood that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. Life had taken much from her, but it had left her with the most important thing, the ability to reinvent herself and find beauty even amid chaos. The echo of the waves, the sound of Elena playing the piano, and Andrei's soft voice speaking of future plans intertwined, filling Sophia's home with a renewed sense of hope and belonging. And as the night unfolded over the coastal city, Sophia knew that although the path was still uncertain, she no longer walked alone. The shine of Sophia's success and the growing notoriety of her work did not go unnoticed by Leonardo. In his penthouse, increasingly empty of warmth and meaning, news of his wife's resurgence reached him like knives to his pride. The irony of Sophia, whom he had abandoned in her most vulnerable moment, now reaching new heights while he silently crumbled, was a blow he could not ignore. The calls from old friends and colleagues mentioning her exhibitions and the articles praising her art only fueled his resentment. Leonardo's financial situation had become desperate. Isabel's maneuvers had been a masterstroke that left him on the brink of ruin. The investments he had promoted had collapsed, and his former sources of income evaporated in a series of risky decisions and unexpected betrayals. What had started as a partnership promising success had turned into a power play where he lost more than just money. He lost his self-trust and judgment. The plan to return to Sophia's life came in a moment of desperation and twisted cunning. Leonardo convinced himself that he still had a right to part of what she had achieved, arguing that as her husband, he could still claim a place in the success story she was writing. The idea of claiming some of her financial and emotional resurgence was both an attempt to regain stability and a way to repair the image he had created in his mind. However, behind that justification, greed and the fear of losing everything were the true forces driving him. The afternoon Leonardo arrived at Sophia's house, he carried a bouquet of flowers and a carefully rehearsed expression of regret. He stopped in front of the door for a moment, observing the facade he knew so well, but now seemed different, filled with more life and meaning than he remembered. He took a deep breath and rang the bell. The wait felt endless until the door opened and Elena appeared in the doorway. The surprise and mix of emotions in her eyes were undeniable. She had not expected to see her father standing at the door after so much time. "Dad," she murmured, unsure whether to feel relief, anger, or confusion. Leonardo smiled with a fake warmth and took a step forward. "Elena, I'm back. I want to make things right." But before he could say more, Sophia appeared behind her daughter with a calm and firm look, the same one she had learned to adopt during her battle. Their eyes met, and at that moment, the past and present collided in a heavy silence. "You can come in," Sophia said after a moment, her voice betraying none of the storm inside. Elena stepped aside, allowing him entry. The house, now filled with new paintings and touches of color, welcomed him like a silent testament to everything he had lost. Memories rushed to his mind, and for a moment, Leonardo felt that his decision to return had been a mistake. But his pride and desperation pushed him to continue. The conversations in the following days were superficial and tense. Leonardo moved cautiously, mentioning how sorry he was and how much he had thought about them. Sophia listened, but her responses were brief, measured. She knew his return wasn't a genuine gesture, and although the betrayal still hurt inside, she had learned to protect herself and, most importantly, to protect Elena. For her part, Elena watched her father with a mix of nostalgia and skepticism. She had longed for his return, but not in the way it had happened, nor with the circumstances she now understood better than before. Lucas, who had always been her support, noticed the tension and anxiety the return of Leonardo caused Elena. During their piano practices, their conversations became more profound. "You don't have to accept what you don't feel, Elena," he said one day, his hands gliding smoothly over the keys. She looked at him, grateful for the sincerity of his words and for being the anchor she needed. Meanwhile, Martin, Sophia's loyal lawyer and friend, continued investigating Leonardo's movements. What he uncovered confirmed his worst fears. Leonardo had not returned out of regret or remorse, but with the intention of claiming part of Sophia's works and success to settle his debts and avoid total ruin. With a furrowed brow and determination in his eyes, Martin brought the news to Sophia and Andrei. The latter, with a hardened face, suggested taking immediate legal action, but Sophia, with a calm born of pain and experience, asked to wait. "I want to see how things develop," she said, aware that Leonardo's return was an opportunity to observe his moves and ensure that Elena would not suffer another sudden betrayal. She knew the next move would be decisive, and she was ready to face it, with the same resilience that had carried her through from the start. The days following Leonardo's return were like walking a tightrope. His presence in the house brought palpable tension, and Sophia moved cautiously, not openly showing the emotions that overwhelmed her. Leonardo, for his part, acted as if trying to make up for lost time, but his carefully calculated words were more of an act than a display of sincere regret. Elena, amidst it all, tried to discern the truth between the nostalgia of memories and the uncertainty of the present. Meanwhile, Sophia could not shake the latent threat that his return represented. While the tension grew in Sophia's house, Isabel continued her maneuvers in the shadows. With each passing day, she solidified her control over what remained of Leonardo's empire. The partners who had once been loyal to him now answered to her, seduced by promises of stability and prosperity. Isabel, with her innate manipulation skills, moved with a confidence that bewildered everyone except herself. To her, Leonardo was a pawn who had already fulfilled his purpose, and her next move was to ensure he was completely removed from the board. Martin, who had closely followed Leonardo and Isabel's financial movements, found a set of documents that evidenced the final betrayal. Isabel had been using Leonardo's resources and signature to guarantee her absolute control. The discovery was the confirmation that Leonardo, unknowingly, had signed his own sentence. Martin brought the information to Sophia and Andrei, who listened intently as the lawyer explained the details of the betrayal. "This is bigger than we thought," said Martin, his voice grave. "Isabel is not only displacing him, she's preparing to annihilate any link Leonardo has with his former possessions. And that includes any attempt to use your works, Sophia, as a lifeline." Andrei, with a tense face, suggested taking immediate legal action to protect Sophia and ensure Leonardo could not manipulate her situation. But Sophia, with a determination she had learned to forge in her struggle, decided to wait a little longer. "I want everything to come to light. I want it all revealed. Only then will Elena understand, and there will be no loose ends." The opportunity came during a community event organized by Maria in honor of Sophia and her journey. The local gallery, decorated with flowers and warm lights, was filled with neighbors and friends who gathered to celebrate the artist's rebirth. The walls were adorned with her works, and at the center of the exhibition, the abandonment stood out as a testament to her struggle and triumph. Leonardo moved among the guests, keeping a rehearsed smile and speaking of his sincere desire for family reconciliation. But just as the atmosphere began to fill with a false sense of calm, a familiar and feared figure appeared at the door. Isabel, in an impeccable black dress and a gaze that radiated authority, walked through the room with confident steps. The murmurs among the guests grew as they recognized her, and Leonardo's face instantly paled. "Good evening, dear neighbors and friends," Isabel said with a sharp smile. "I'm sorry to interrupt this lovely evening, but I fear there are matters that need to be discussed." Her words caused a silence to fall over the room, and all eyes turned to Leonardo, whose expression shifted from surprise to panic. With a dramatic gesture, Isabel lifted a set of documents she had been carrying. This man, who now tries to paint himself as the repentant and devoted husband, has done nothing but plan how to appropriate Sophia's success and anything that could save him from his ruin, she said, dropping the papers on the central table where the evidence of his actions unfolded like an undeniable truth. Sophia, who had remained calm up until that moment, felt the weight of the betrayal lighten, not because of Leonardo's exposure, but because the truth was finally in the air. Andrei stepped forward, taking one of the documents and confirming what Martin had already discovered. Leonardo didn't just sign agreements that led to his downfall, but they were also made in a way that would affect others. "But there's something Isabel didn't expect," he said, and a shadow of intrigue crossed the woman's face. At that moment, Martin intervened. "Isabel, your manipulations also left a trail, and that evidence is enough to begin proceedings against you. You've abused your power and access to divert funds and manipulate the situation in your favor." The words fell like a hammer, and before Isabel could respond, the police, whom Martin had alerted, entered the room and escorted her out, leaving a murmur of astonishment among the guests. Leonardo, for the first time, found himself completely exposed, without allies or masks. Elena, who had witnessed everything, looked at him with eyes full of tears, but her expression was one of determination that surprised everyone. "Dad, I understand everything now," she said, and her words marked the end of any illusion he may have had about reconciliation. Sophia, feeling both relief and sadness, stepped forward. Her voice, calm but firm, broke the silence. "Leonardo, this isn't just your failure. It's the culmination of your decisions. And though it hurts, you need to understand that this is where your journey with us ends." The night, which had started as a celebration, ended as a reminder that the truth always finds its way. And as Elena and Lucas's soft music filled the air once more, Sophia and her daughter's lives continued, marked by pain, but also by the unshakable strength to start anew. The revelation at the gallery was the trigger for a series of events that changed everything. The following days were marked by tense conversations and looks filled with unspoken emotions. Leonardo, defeated and without allies, remained in Sophia's house, a presence she tolerated only for Elena, but which was becoming increasingly unbearable. His once confident and arrogant demeanor had now faded, reflecting the defeat he had finally accepted. Elena, for her part, had decided to remain firm and observe. The young woman, who had until then navigated between nostalgia and hope, understood with pain that the truth about her father was harsher than she had imagined. Isabel's words, Martin's evidence, and Andres's confession left no room for doubt. Leonardo had not returned out of love or remorse. He had returned out of greed and desperation. One afternoon, as the sun began to tint the sky with orange hues, Sophia found herself alone with Leonardo in the living room. The house was quiet, and the moment felt inevitable, a confrontation both knew had to happen. Sophia, with a serene face but eyes hardened by determination, took a seat in front of him. Leonardo, who had been staring blankly, lifted his gaze and saw in her a strength that disarmed him. "You don't have to stay," Sophia said, breaking the silence with a firm voice. "I know why you came back, and there's no more game you can play here." Leonardo pressed his lips together and lowered his gaze. For years, he had been a master of words and manipulation, but now, sitting in the same house where he had left a void, he found himself defenseless. "I made mistakes, Sophia," he murmured, his voice broken. "Mistakes that cost me everything." "And those mistakes didn't just cost you," Sophia replied, her tone devoid of compassion. "They cost all of us, but it's no longer our problem. You can't redeem yourself at the expense of what I've built since you left." Leonardo lifted his gaze, searching for some trace of the woman who had once loved him, but what he found was a version of Sophia stronger and more determined than he had imagined. At that moment, he understood that he no longer had a place in this home, not in the way he had hoped. Guilt and regret began to invade him, but they were late emotions, useless in the face of reality. The door opened, and Elena entered, her steps slow and her expression full of resolve. She looked at her mother and father, and for a moment, the silence became thick. "I've heard enough," Elena said, her voice trembling but firm. "Dad, I want you to know I understand why you're here, but I also want you to know that we're not the same anymore. What you've done cannot be erased." Elena's words cut through the air like a knife. Leonardo, who had never felt so small, nodded silently. In his mind, the images of Sophia painting in the studio, of Elena playing the piano with the laughter that once filled the house, and of the days when everything seemed stable and secure, mingled with a bitter realization. He had destroyed what he now tried to recover. Sophia stood up and walked toward the window, letting the fresh afternoon air fill the room. "Leonardo, it's time for you to leave," she said, with a tranquility that only someone who has found peace after the storm can project. "We will move forward, and you need to find your way out of here." Leonardo stood up, feeling the weight of his defeat. He looked at Sophia and then at Elena, searching for some sign of forgiveness, but found an impenetrable wall. Without saying another word, he grabbed his jacket and walked toward the door. As he left, the weight of solitude hit him like never before, understanding that this was his true punishment. When the door closed behind him, the house exhaled a sigh of relief. Sophia, still standing by the window, felt the tension leave her body. Andrei appeared in the room, having heard enough from the entrance. He walked toward Sophia and took her hand, a simple gesture but full of meaning. Elena, with tears in her eyes, approached them, and for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to cry, not out of sadness, but out of liberation. In that moment, the house, once filled with pain and betrayal, felt like a renewed home, ready for a new beginning. Leonardo, once considered a man of success and charisma, now found himself in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. The walls were grey and bare, a reflection of the life that remained for him. Days slipped by without distinction, and the echo of his solitary footsteps resonated in the empty room. No partners sought him out anymore, and no important meetings awaited him. Everything he had once considered important had faded, leaving only the bitter company of his own conscience. The nights were the worst. The silence, which he had once found comforting, now suffocated him. He sat by the window, watching the life outside continue with energy and movement, while he remained trapped in a spiral of regret and pain. The images of Sophia and Elena were ghosts that haunted him, reminding him of every selfish decision and every lie that led him to this point. Isabel, the woman he had believed to be his partner, was now just a name in the press, a protagonist in a financial scandal that left her facing charges and powerless. There was nothing left, and no one to hold him up. The city, which he had once walked with the confidence of a king, now seemed foreign to him, indifferent to his fall. Leonardo, with his worn face and lost gaze, understood that his ruin was not only financial, it was a collapse that had begun in his heart long before. Pride, unchecked ambition, and the inability to value what truly mattered had led him to lose everything. Meanwhile, life in Sophia's house had changed irreversibly. The tension that had marked the last few weeks dissipated after Leonardo's definitive departure. The house, once a witness to betrayal and abandonment, was now a space filled with laughter and warmth. Maria organized a special dinner for Sophia, Elena, and Andres, a small gesture to celebrate the peace they had regained. Conversations flowed, and the joy on everyone's faces was palpable. Elena, who had found in Lucas more than a friend, now felt that the pain of the last few months had made room for hope. The presentation at the school's charity gala was just around the corner, and her piece, a composition that blended melancholy and overcoming, was her way of honoring her mother's struggle and the path they had walked together. Andres, sitting beside Sophia, looked at her with admiration and tenderness. For years, he had kept his feelings hidden out of respect for her history with Leonardo. But now, in the midst of the new normal they had created, he felt it might be time to speak. "Sophia," he whispered during dinner, "I want you to know that everything I've done wasn't just for your recovery. It's been for you, because you've always been important to me." Sophia looked at him, surprised but deeply moved, and responded with a sincere smile. "I know, Andres, and I appreciate it more than you can imagine." The night of the charity gala was an emotional event. The school auditorium was decorated with soft lights and details reflecting the history of the community. Friends, neighbors, and family gathered to support the students, and especially Elena, whose story had touched everyone's hearts. Lucas, with a look that conveyed unwavering support, took his place at the piano, while Elena took a deep breath before beginning to sing. The melody began soft, an echo of the tears shed and the hard days. But as the song progressed, the notes transformed into a crescendo of hope and release. The words spoke of the strength to move forward, of the light that can be found even in the darkest moments. When the last note resonated through the auditorium, a moved silence gave way to a unanimous ovation. Sophia, with eyes full of tears of pride, embraced Maria and Andres, feeling in her heart that everything she had been through had led them to this moment. Meanwhile, in his empty apartment, Leonardo turned on the radio for the first time in weeks. He didn't expect to hear anything of significance, but a broadcast about the school gala mentioned Sophia and her daughter, praising the piece Elena had presented. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let the music described in the broadcast fill the space between his memories and his solitude. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that Sophia's success was not just a personal achievement, but a collective victory of love and support, something he had been unable to build or preserve. Sophia, on the other hand, knew that the journey had not been in vain. Life, though marked by scars, had given her a second chance at happiness. And as Elena's music faded into the air, she looked at her daughter and Andres, feeling that, for the first time in a long while, the future belonged to them, free of shadows and full of promises. The sea breeze gently caressed the white curtains of Sophia's studio, filling the space with the salty, fresh scent she loved. Sitting at her desk with a cup of hot tea in her hands, she gazed through the window at the horizon, where the sky and the sea met in an endless embrace. The house, now brighter than ever, overflowed with life. The laughter of Elena and Lucas could be heard from the garden, where they practiced for an upcoming recital, and the warm, familiar voice of Andres added to the conversation. Sophia took a deep breath and opened the hardcover notebook in front of her. She picked up a pen and wrote the first words of what would be her memoir, Renacer en tempestad, Rebirth in the storm. Each word that followed was an echo of her story, a mix of painful memories and moments of triumph. Writing was a cathartic process, a journey through the days when illness, betrayal, and loneliness surrounded her, but also through the moments of strength and love that had brought her here. The sound of piano keys softly echoed through the house, and Sophia smiled as she recognized the melody. It was the same piece Elena had performed at the charity gala, a work that had now become a symbol of all they had overcome together. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. The young woman playing the piano with passion was living proof that, despite everything, life had found its way back to them. Andrei entered the studio with a smile on his face and a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. "I thought these might inspire you while you write," he said, placing them in a vase by the window. Their eyes met, and in that brief exchange, no words were necessary. It had been some time since he had confessed his feelings, and since she, timidly, had begun to open herself to the idea of a future together. Andrei was more than a friend and a doctor. He was the companion who had been there during the darkest times and who now shared the light they had found. Sophia's exhibition, named after her most significant work, El Abandono, the abandonment, continued to attract attention and admiration. Critics and art lovers spoke of her as a symbol of resilience, and the community took pride in having her as one of their own voices of struggle and rebirth. The gallery visits became a meeting place where people shared stories of overcoming and found solace in Sophia's brushstrokes. Meanwhile, Elena was preparing for her next big project with Lucas. Music had become her way of processing pain and celebrating life. During rehearsals, Lucas watched her with a tenderness that went beyond friendship, and though neither of them had taken a step beyond the complicity they shared, the promise of something more glimmered in every note they played together. One afternoon, the house filled with friends and neighbors who came to celebrate the success of the exhibition and share in Sophia's happiness. Maria, always lively and with a joke ready, made sure everyone was laughing and enjoying themselves. Conversations intertwined, and Elena's laughter, clear and sincere, was the melody that united them all. Leonardo, from his small apartment, heard of the success of the exhibition and the life that continued without him. He had tried to rebuild something of what he had lost, but without the respect and trust he had once scorned, every effort felt like a solitary struggle. He bitterly reflected on the decisions that led him there, finally understanding that what he had lost was irrecoverable, not just in material things, but in the love and family he had left behind. As evening fell, Sophia retired for a moment to the studio. With her gaze fixed on the horizon, she felt again that peace she had long thought would never return. Andrei appeared in the doorway, and she invited him in. They sat together, in silence, listening to the murmur of the sea and the distant laughter of the others. He took her hand, and Sophia, for the first time in a long time, felt that everything was in its place. "What's next?" Andrei asked, with a slight gleam of curiosity in his voice. Sophia smiled and looked at the hardcover notebook. "What comes next is moving forward, living each day with love and gratitude, and writing our story so that others know that after the storm, there is always a sunrise." And as the last light of the day faded into the horizon, Sophia knew that this new chapter of her life was just beginning, full of hope, love, and the certainty that, no matter what the future brought, she was ready to face it, surrounded by those who mattered. Sophia's story reminds us of the transformative power of resilience and love, even in life's darkest moments. It reflects how, despite betrayals, losses, and seemingly insurmountable challenges, humans possess an innate ability to rebuild and find beauty where there was once only pain. Sophia teaches us that adversity does not define who we are, but how we choose to face it. She faced a devastating illness, and the betrayal of someone she deeply trusted. And though these blows could have broken her, she chose to take those fragments of herself and turn them into art, a legacy of resistance that inspired those around her. Every brushstroke she made was more than an act of creation. It was a declaration of life, an affirmation that even in the most difficult circumstances, we can find light and meaning. Leonardo's abandonment, though painful, became a lesson in the value of true connections. While he chose the easy path, guided by his selfishness and ambition, Sophia discovered that the relationships that truly matter are those built with empathy, love, and genuine commitment. Maria, Andrei, and later even Elena showed that unconditional support and loyalty are the true foundation of emotional strength. It reminds us that we are not defined by who leaves us, but by who chooses to stay by our side. Elena, in turn, shows us the importance of finding our voice, of transforming pain into something beautiful and meaningful. Her music became a bridge between her own suffering and healing, and through her art, she not only reconnected with herself, but also with her mother and those around her. In her, we see the power of creativity as a tool for healing, a reminder that there are always ways to express what words cannot say. On the other hand, Leonardo's fall is an example of how boundless ambition and a lack of empathy can lead to an empty life. His ruin was not only financial, it was a loss of humanity, a reminder that success void of meaning holds no true value. His story contrasts deeply with Sophia's, showing that true wealth lies in the relationships we cultivate and in how we face our own truths. In this story, we also find a powerful message about forgiveness and acceptance. Although Sophia did not allow Leonardo to return to her life the way he wanted, she also didn't allow herself to be consumed by resentment. Her decision not to seek revenge was a testament to her personal growth, to her ability to protect her peace and her love for Eleanor, prioritizing what truly mattered. It's a lesson on how letting go is not a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of strength and wisdom. In the end, what shines in this story is the idea of rebirth. Life is not linear nor perfect, and falls are inevitable. But in those moments of falling, we also find the seeds of change. Sophia rose from the ashes of her pain, not as the person she once was, but as someone stronger, more whole, and more authentic. Her story invites us to reflect on our own capacity for rebirth, to find in our scars not just a reminder of what we've lost, but also of what we've gained in the process. It is a reflection on the value of surrounding ourselves with people who truly support us, of finding our own form of expression, and of learning to let go of what no longer serves us to make room for new possibilities. It reminds us that, although life can be cruel, it can also be profoundly beautiful if we choose to face it with courage and love. Thank you for joining us on this story of resilience, love, and second chances. If anything in this story inspired or made you reflect, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Remember, just like Sophia, we can always find the light, even in the darkest moments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell to keep sharing stories that touch the heart. See you in the next video, and may your life always be filled with hope and strength. See you soon.